Escort her out. Now!
Rose was being thrown out.
Do not let her speak to the bride.
Grant wanted her silenced. Maya saw everything.
Aunt Rose! What is happening?
Give me the box, and this ends quietly.
The box terrified him.
Let her go.
Do not sign anything. You need to hear the truth. That man is lying to you, Maya. Your grandmother knew exactly who you would become.
Security will handle her.
His mother helped hide it.
Tell me the truth.
His grandmother left this for you. The twin Charles.
16 months earlier, it all seemed impossible. At 31, Maya had built a life that looked ordinary from the outside and meaningful to anyone who knew her. She taught at a public school on the east side of Briarwood, where she worked with children whose families had learned to measure time in appointments, bus schedules, and insurance denials. Her classroom was full of picture cards, weighted blankets, chipped tables, and little victories that never made the news. Maya knew the names of every child who hated loud rooms, every parent who had learned to apologize for arriving late, and every student who had been told, directly or indirectly, that their needs were too expensive. She had not grown up with much. Her mother, Lila, had been a reading specialist who believed that every child deserved at least one adult who saw potential before behavior. When Lila died suddenly after a brief illness, Maya was 14. Rose, Lila's older sister, had taken her in without speeches or conditions. Rose had worked night shifts as a home care nurse then, and money was always tight. But Maya never remembered feeling unwanted. She remembered packed lunches, secondhand books, birthday cakes that leaned to one side, and a woman who would stay awake until dawn after a double shift just to make sure Maya had finished her homework. Rose never pretended their life was glamorous. She taught Maya how to repair a hem, how to stretch soup across 3 dinners, how to recognize when someone was treating kindness as weakness. There was one lesson, however, that Maya had never fully understood. Rose believed that the people most eager to be admired were often the people least willing to be known. Maya used to think it was simply the wisdom of someone who had spent decades in strangers' homes, watching families perform love for visitors and abandon it when the doors closed. Then Grant Holloway arrived at her school with a camera crew, a group of foundation staff, and a donation large enough to replace the classroom equipment Maya had spent years begging the district to approve. The Holloway Foundation had been a familiar name in Briarwood for as long as Maya could remember. It funded scholarships, literacy centers, hospital wings, and polished advertisements about lifting communities through opportunity. Its founder, Eleanor Holloway, had been remembered as a stern but generous woman who turned a small family business into a philanthropic empire. After Eleanor's death, the foundation passed into the hands of her daughter, Catherine, and her grandson, Grant. They appeared in magazines, stood beside oversized checks, and spoke often about legacy. Grant entered Maya's classroom in a tailored suit that did not quite belong among finger paint and sensory toys. Yet he seemed to know exactly how to make himself fit. He knelt beside a student who had trouble making eye contact. He listened while Maya explained why a new communications device could change a child's day. He asked questions that made her believe he had actually read the proposal rather than simply approved it. By the end of the visit, he had promised not only the devices, but a small grant for teacher training across the district. Maya was careful at first. She had seen wealthy people arrive with announcements and leave before the real work began. But Grant kept returning. He attended school board meetings. He remembered the names of students. He sent handwritten notes after difficult weeks. And when he asked Maya to dinner, he did it without making her feel like a charitable project he had decided to rescue. Their relationship moved quickly, though not carelessly. Grant took Maya to quiet restaurants rather than the places reporters followed him. He listened when she talked about her students, even when the stories had no easy ending. He seemed to admire that she did not chase his money or his family name. In fact, he often said that being with her felt like stepping outside the world that expected something from him every minute of the day. Rose did not share Maya's confidence. She was polite to Grant, never openly hostile, but she watched him in a way that made him uncomfortable. She noticed how his generosity increased when a camera was nearby. She noticed that he asked Maya to send photographs whenever a new device arrived at school, then later claimed those photographs had inspired the Foundation's latest campaign. She noticed the small pauses in his expression when Maya disagreed with him, the faint tightening around his mouth when anyone failed to admire him quickly enough. Still, Rose said little. Maya had spent most of her life being underestimated because of where she came from. Rose did not want to become another person, telling her that happiness was too fragile for someone like them to trust. So she kept her concerns to herself, hoping she was wrong. For a while, it seemed she might be. Grant proposed on a winter evening beneath the lights of a small botanical garden that had been closed to the public for the night. There were no journalists, no celebrity friends, no branded banners. Maya believed that was proof the moment belonged only to them. When she said yes, Grant held her as though he had been waiting his whole life for someone who did not care about the Holloway name. The engagement changed the temperature around them almost immediately. Catherine Holloway began appearing more often, always elegant, always measured, always able to make a criticism sound like concern. She offered to manage the wedding because, as she gently suggested, a marriage into the Holloway family attracted attention, and attention required care. She selected the chapel, the guest list, the flowers, the menus, and eventually most of the people allowed to have an opinion. At first, Maya accepted this as generosity. She had never planned a wedding and did not want to be ungrateful. But Catherine's help came with a quiet process of removal. Maya's co-workers were shifted to a distant table because the room was limited. Rose was advised that a smaller family dinner before the ceremony might be more comfortable than the main reception. A photo of Maya's mother, which Maya wanted near the ceremony flowers, was described as too personal for the visual plan. Each decision seemed minor by itself. Together, they made Maya feel less like a bride and more like a detail being arranged. Grant always found a way to smooth it over. He told Maya his mother had spent her life managing public attention and did not know how to stop. He promised that once the wedding was over, they would build a life with fewer expectations and more space. Maya wanted to believe him. Every time doubt appeared, she reminded herself of the man who had sat on the floor of her classroom and listened to a child struggle to form one sentence. Rose, however, recognized something Maya did not. She had seen Catherine Holloway before, though Maya had never known it. Nearly 20 years earlier, Rose had worked as a private nurse for Eleanor Holloway during the final season of Eleanor's life. By then, Eleanor was no longer the towering public figure people admired from newspaper photographs. She was ill, exhausted, and increasingly troubled by things happening inside the Foundation that carried her name. Rose had been hired because Eleanor wanted someone outside the family. She had told the agency that she needed a nurse who could be trusted not to confuse employment with loyalty to Catherine or Grant. Rose had not understood the significance of that request until the nights when Eleanor could not sleep. On those nights, the old woman spoke less about death than betrayal. She had built the Holloway Foundation to keep children from being discarded by systems that found them inconvenient. Yet she had begun to suspect that her own family was using the foundation as a stage set, moving money through polished programs while the people in greatest need were removed from the picture. Eleanor never gave Rose every detail. She was too careful for that. But she did ask Rose to keep a cedar box hidden where Catherine would never think to look. She told her that the box contained what mattered if the family ever tried to turn compassion into a costume. Rose had promised without understanding how expensive that promise would become. After Eleanor died, Catherine claimed that the final estate documents had been settled. The foundation continued, and Grant grew into its public face. Rose received no invitation to the funeral reception. She kept the box in the back of a linen cabinet for years, telling herself that perhaps the danger Eleanor feared had passed. Then Grant began dating Maya. The first warning came 6 weeks before the wedding, when Rose visited Maya's apartment and found a stack of documents waiting to be signed. Maya had been told they were standard papers connected to her future role at the foundation. Grant wanted her to become the public education ambassador after the honeymoon. He said her work with children made her the perfect person to lead a new initiative. Rose read only a few pages before her hands began to shake. Buried beneath language about reputation, privacy, and coordinated communication was a clause preventing Maya from making public statements about foundation activities without written approval. There were financial penalties, confidentiality rules, and restrictions that would follow her even if she stepped away from the role. It was not a partnership agreement, it was a leash. That night, Rose went home, opened the linen cabinet, and took out the cedar box for the first time in almost 2 decades. Inside, beneath a yellowing knit scarf Eleanor had once used to wrap the documents, were pages bearing the old woman's signature, a sealed letter addressed to Rose, and a thin ledger written in a disciplined hand. The first page of the letter made one thing painfully clear. Eleanor had not asked Rose to protect a fortune. She had asked her to protect people. And if the day came when a Holloway tried to use marriage, charity, or public admiration to silence someone vulnerable, Rose was to make sure the truth reached the light. Rose had no idea how close that day was until the morning of Maya's wedding. The morning of the wedding arrived under a hard, bright sky that made every window of the Holloway estate shine. By 7 o'clock, the chapel garden was already filled with florists, caterers, stylists, photographers, and assistants carrying clipboards. The place looked less like a home than a machine built to manufacture a perfect memory. Every rose had been inspected. Every candle had been placed at the correct height. Every place card had been checked twice. And in the center of it all, Maya was being prepared to marry the man everyone insisted had given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined. Rose arrived alone just after 9. She wore the blue dress Maya had helped her choose, a simple coat against the morning chill, and the old cedar box tucked inside a canvas bag. She had spent the night reading Eleanor's letter until the words blurred. There was no instruction telling her to interrupt a wedding, no sentence ordering her to humiliate Grant or expose the family in front of strangers. Eleanor had only asked her to act before another innocent person became part of a lie. That difference mattered to Rose. She did not want revenge. She did not even want to ruin Grant. What frightened her was the thought of Maya spending years trying to understand why the man she loved had slowly taken control of her voice, her work, and her memories of what was right. Rose had watched that happen to women before. It rarely began with cruelty that anyone else could see. It began with decisions made on their behalf, concerns dismissed as stress, and gratitude demanded in exchange for a comfortable cage. Catherine saw Rose before Maya did. Her eyes moved to the canvas bag, then to Rose's shoes, then to the anxious way Rose searched the corridor for someone who could take her to the bridal room. Catherine greeted her with polished restraint, but the message beneath her manners was immediate. Rose had not been expected to arrive so early, and the family could not allow distractions on a day meant to be photographed from every angle. Rose asked to speak with Maya privately. Catherine explained that the bride was overwhelmed and could not be disturbed. Rose said the matter could not wait. Catherine's expression barely changed, but she sent an assistant to find Grant. Grant appeared several minutes later in his formal suit, surrounded by the calm authority of someone accustomed to people making space for him. At first, he treated Rose like an inconvenience that could be managed. He suggested she give Maya the box after the ceremony. He reminded her that the bride had enough emotions to handle. He implied that an old family matter could surely wait until the guests had gone home. Then Rose told him that the box had belonged to Eleanor. The change in Grant was small, but Rose had spent enough years at bedsides to recognize the body's betrayal of the mind. His shoulders tightened, his gaze dropped toward the bag, and returned too quickly. For a moment, the careful warmth in his face disappeared. He asked Rose what exactly Eleanor had given her. Rose did not answer. She only said that Maya needed to see it before signing anything connected to the Holloway Foundation. That was when Grant stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. He spoke to Rose in the low, controlled manner of a man who knew anger would look bad if anyone overheard. He suggested that grief could distort old memories. He implied that she might be confused by documents she did not understand. He warned her that upsetting Maya on her wedding day would be unforgivable. Rose had heard sharper words in hospital rooms, usually from families who had mistaken fear for authority. She told him that a person who feared the truth before a marriage had no right to ask for trust after it. Grant's face hardened. He did not order the guards to remove her immediately. Not then. He knew that would draw attention. Instead, he asked one of Catherine's assistants to escort Rose to a side lounge and promised that Maya would join her when she was ready. It was a softer form of exile, designed to look considerate. For 20 minutes, Rose sat alone in a room decorated with cream-colored furniture she was afraid to touch. Outside the door, footsteps passed without stopping. The wedding moved forward as though she had already been erased from it. She could hear distant music being tested in the chapel and the low murmur of guests arriving. With every minute, she felt the old weight of hesitation return. Perhaps Maya deserved a quiet day. Perhaps Rose was about to damage the one thing her niece had allowed herself to want. Then she remembered Lila. She remembered Maya at 14, trying to be brave at a funeral because she thought crying would make Rose's burden heavier. She remembered every time Maya had stood up for a child who had been treated as difficult rather than deserving. and she realized that protecting Maya's peace by hiding the truth was not protection at all. It was surrender. Rose left the lounge and headed toward the bridal corridor. The assistant tried to stop her. Rose apologized and kept walking. Catherine saw her approaching and immediately understood what was happening. Grant had just taken his place near the chapel entrance, where the first guests could see him. To anyone watching, he looked composed and proud. But when Rose reached the corridor, his composure cracked. Maya was only a few doors away, surrounded by bridesmaids and makeup artists. She heard raised voices, then stepped into the hall before someone could close the door. Her wedding dress caught the morning light, and for a second, Rose saw the little girl she had raised, dressed for a future Rose had once believed would be safe. Grant moved between them. He told Maya that Rose was tired and upset, that she had become confused about an old matter related to his grandmother. He made it sound merciful, as though he were protecting both women from embarrassment. Maya looked at Rose, waiting for her aunt to deny it or explain. Rose tried to reach into the bag. Grant caught her wrist. It was not a violent movement. That was what made it worse. It was quick, controlled, almost invisible. But Maya saw it. She saw the way Rose flinched. She saw the anger in Grant's eyes before he replaced it with concern. And something inside her shifted. Grant released Rose immediately and tried to draw Maya away from the moment. He reminded her that hundreds of guests were arriving. He spoke about timing, pressure, and how much stress Rose must be under. He made the entire situation sound like a fragile inconvenience that Maya had the duty to manage. Maya asked Rose whether she needed help. Rose looked at her, then at Grant, and made a decision that broke her own heart. She told Maya that she did, but that the truth could not be spoken in a hallway full of people who wanted it hidden. Catherine called security. What happened next was the moment that would later be described in different ways by every person who had witnessed it. Some guests would say Rose refused to cooperate. Others would insist the guards were only guiding her outside. Catherine would claim the family had been concerned for Rose's well-being. Grant would tell anyone who listened that he had tried to protect Maya from a painful misunderstanding. But Maya remembered the facts. She remembered Rose clutching the cedar box. She remembered the guards treating a 68-year-old woman as though dignity were something that could be removed by force. She remembered Grant watching instead of stopping them. And she remembered the hollow feeling that came when a person she loved showed her, without realizing it, who they were. Rose was taken through the side doors and into the driveway. The music inside the chapel swelled. The wedding coordinator hurried Maya toward the room where she was supposed to wait until the processional. Everyone spoke at once, telling her there was no need to worry, no need to ruin the day, no need to let Rose's confusion become a disaster. Maya let them lead her for several steps. Then she stopped. The word disaster lingered in her mind. It was the same word Grant had used 3 weeks earlier when one of his Foundation employees had tried to meet with him after being dismissed. Maya had asked what happened, and Grant had said the employee was creating a disaster because she had misunderstood how professional organizations worked. At the time, Maya had accepted the explanation. Now she remembered the coldness behind it. She looked down at her hands and noticed something folded beneath the white ribbon of her bouquet. Rose must have slipped it there when Grant had grabbed her wrist. It was a single page torn from Eleanor's letter. Maya read it in the quiet of the preparation room while her bridesmaids watched her face change. The handwriting was weak but clear. Eleanor had written that there were people who called themselves guardians of a legacy, while feeding on the very trust they were supposed to protect. She had written that the family's greatest danger was not scandal, but the habit of teaching others to confuse wealth with virtue. And near the bottom of the page, she had left a warning addressed not to Maya by name, but to whoever might one day be asked to marry into the Holloway world. Never sign away your voice in exchange for a place at their table. Maya read the sentence twice. Then she asked her bridesmaids to leave. For the first time all morning, no one told her what the next step should be. Outside, Grant was taking his place near the altar. He believed Rose had been removed. He believed the box was still in her hands, but far enough away to handle after the ceremony. He believed Maya had been surrounded by enough pressure, beauty, and expectation to keep her moving forward. He did not understand that the best thing Rose had ever given Maya was not shelter, food, or even love. It was the ability to recognize the moment when silence became a betrayal. Maya removed her veil, not because she had decided anything yet, but because she needed to see clearly. Then she left the room through the service hallway, past the floral displays and polished mirrors, and walked toward the driveway where Rose was waiting beside the car that had brought her there. The ceremony had not begun, but the marriage was already over. Rose was sitting on the low stone wall near the estate driveway when Maya found her. The security men had stepped back once they realized the bride was walking toward them, but they remained close enough to remind Rose that even outside the chapel, the Holloway family believed they could decide where she belonged. For a few seconds, neither woman spoke. Maya stood in her wedding dress without a veil, carrying a bouquet she no longer knew what to do with. Rose looked smaller than she had that morning, not because she was weak, but because the years of keeping Eleanor's secret had suddenly become visible in the curve of her shoulders. Maya sat beside her and reached for the cedar box. Rose did not hand it over immediately. She asked Maya to understand that whatever happened next had to be Maya's choice. Rose had not come to command her, to punish Grant, or to turn one terrible morning into the only definition of Maya's life. She had come because a marriage could survive disappointment, fear, even ordinary mistakes. It could not survive a foundation built on contempt. Then she opened the box. Inside was the original third codicil to Eleanor Holloway's will, signed before 2 independent witnesses and sealed by a small legal practice outside Briarwood. It had never appeared in the estate papers Catherine presented after Eleanor died. The document did not take every dollar from the Holloway family or hand Rose some secret fortune. Its purpose was more precise. Eleanor had placed the voting control of the foundation into a protective trust to be activated if a member of her family used the organization to conceal fraud, retaliate against employees, or coerce another person into surrendering their voice for the sake of the Holloway name. Rose had also kept a ledger Eleanor compiled during the last months of her life. It tracked grants that were publicly announced but never fully delivered, contracts redirected through companies controlled by Catherine's friends, and scholarships that disappeared from internal lists after the cameras had gone. The final pages contained names. They were not the names of powerful people. They belonged to teachers, community coordinators, social workers, and former foundation employees who had tried to raise concerns and had been quietly pushed out. There was one name Maya recognized at once. It belonged to a woman named Helena Ward, a former director of the Holloway Education Initiative. 3 weeks earlier, Grant had called Helena a disgruntled employee who had tried to create problems after losing her position. Maya had believed him because she wanted to believe him. But the ledger showed that Helena had objected to funds being moved out of school programs and into a marketing campaign designed around Grant's public image. Her dismissal had not been a misunderstanding. It had been retaliation. At the bottom of the box lay the agreement Grant wanted Maya to sign after the wedding. Rose had found a copy among documents left at Maya's apartment. Eleanor's letter explained why it mattered. Grant was not simply inviting Maya to become an ambassador for the foundation. He wanted her to become the moral face of a new campaign while binding her to confidentiality terms that would make it difficult for her to speak if she discovered what the family had done. Maya held the papers in her lap. The chapel bells began to ring behind them, a signal that the ceremony should be starting. For years, she had thought love meant believing in the best version of someone until they proved otherwise. But looking at the documents, she understood that Grant had already proved otherwise. She had simply been given reasons to look away. Rose told her there was one more thing Maya needed to know. Before coming to the wedding, Rose had sent copies of every document to the legal practice named in Eleanor's codicil and to the 3 independent trustees Eleanor had selected long ago. Rose had delayed for years because the evidence alone had not been enough to show the full pattern. But Grant's attempt to bind Maya to silence, combined with his treatment of Rose that morning, had made the pattern impossible to deny. Maya could not undo what Grant had done. She could not bring back the employees who had lost their jobs, or the children whose programs had been cut while the Holloways posed for photographs. But she could refuse to become the next polished layer over the truth. She stood and took Rose's hand. When they walked back into the chapel, the guests turned toward them with the curiosity of people who had waited too long without an explanation. Grant was at the altar beneath an arch of white flowers, looking composed, but increasingly irritated. Catherine sat in the front row, her face fixed in the expression of someone prepared to call anything inconvenient a misunderstanding. Maya did not rush. She did not let the wedding coordinator guide her into position. She walked down the aisle beside Rose, not because Rose needed to be rescued, but because neither of them would be separated again to make someone else comfortable. Grant tried to meet Maya with concern. He made the expression of a man ready to forgive a bride for panicking under pressure. He moved toward her, as though the only obstacle between them was a private emotional moment that could be smoothed over with the right words. Maya stopped several feet away. She told him, before their families and the people who had come to admire them, that there would be no wedding. She said she could not marry a man who treated her aunt's dignity as an inconvenience. She could not marry someone who used charity to build his image while hiding the harm done to the people who trusted him. And she would not sign away her voice so that the Holloway family could keep calling itself generous. The room did not explode into chaos. Real shock rarely does. It arrived as stillness. Grant's first instinct was to deny everything. He insisted that Rose had misunderstood old documents and that Maya had been manipulated on an emotional day. He suggested that the papers belonged in the hands of lawyers, not guests. In a narrow sense, he was right. The documents did belong with lawyers. That was exactly where Rose had already sent them. But Grant made one mistake. In trying to diminish Rose, he revealed the same contempt that had brought them all to that moment. He described her as a former employee who had spent too long attached to the family's past. He spoke as though years of service made her less credible, not more. Several people in the room looked at one another. Some had worked with the foundation. Some had seen the polished version of Grant for years. And suddenly, they remembered the staff members who had vanished The programs announced with fanfare and then quietly abandoned. The questions that had never received answers. Catherine rose from her seat and tried to take control. She suggested postponing the ceremony, moving the discussion somewhere private, protecting Maya from further embarrassment. But Maya understood the language now. Private had always meant hidden. Protected had always meant silenced. She placed the cedar box on the front pew and walked out of the chapel with Rose. The photographs later showed the moment in a way no one could have planned. The bride was still wearing white, but she was not crying. Rose was still carrying her worn canvas bag. Behind them, the flowers, musicians, and imported decorations remained exactly where they had been placed. Expensive proof that beauty could not save a lie once the truth had entered the room. The fallout did not happen in one dramatic afternoon. It happened through letters, audits, meetings, frozen accounts, and people finally realizing they were no longer alone. Within 48 hours, the independent trustees filed for an emergency review of the Holloway Foundation. The legal practice confirmed the authenticity of Eleanor's codicil. Grant's public role was suspended, while outside auditors examined the records, and Catherine resigned from the board before the trustees could vote to remove her. The family's public relations team called it a dispute over estate documents, but that explanation collapsed when former employees began sharing their own records. Helena Ward came forward first, with years of emails showing that Grant's office had delayed grants until media campaigns could be arranged. A regional coordinator described programs cut because the children they served did not fit the right image. A finance manager produced instructions to classify image-building expenses as community outreach. The Holloways had protected themselves by making each person believe their experience was isolated. Once those people compared their records, the pattern was impossible to deny. The investigation found that Grant had inherited a culture of manipulation from Catherine and had learned to make it look modern, polished, and strategic. But he had intensified it. He planned to make Maya the face of an education campaign because her sincerity gave him what money could not buy: credibility. Grant had spent years deciding which children were visible enough to deserve help. In the end, his future depended on the testimony of people he had tried to make invisible. The Protective Trust took control of the foundation's voting rights. It rebuilt the board with teachers, community representatives, former program staff, and independent financial oversight. Grants were reviewed, neglected programs were restored where possible, and the people who had been ignored were finally given a chance to speak before decisions were made again. Grant faced civil cases, financial inquiries, lost partnerships, and the collapse of the public platform he had treated as proof of his worth. More painful to him than the money was the loss of control. For the first time, he could not shape the narrative with a smile, a speech, or a carefully placed photograph. Catherine watched the family name become a symbol of everything Eleanor had tried to prevent. She was undone, not by a stranger, but by the records of the woman she had dismissed as powerless. Rose did not become rich or accept a seat at the head of the foundation. She returned to her small apartment and neighborhood clinic, but the trustees asked her to serve as a community advisor. She agreed only if teachers and families had more influence than donors. Maya took time away from work after the wedding that never happened. She grieved the man she thought Grant was, the future she had imagined, and the embarrassment of having nearly walked into a life designed to shrink her. But she did not regret leaving. She learned that heartbreak was not proof of weakness. Sometimes it was proof that a person had chosen truth before comfort. Months later, Maya returned to her classroom. The room still had chipped tables, picture cards, and students who needed more help than the system could easily provide. But the Holloway Foundation, now under new oversight, funded the program without camera crews or branding requirements. Maya refused the title of ambassador when the trustees offered it. She chose instead to help create a teacher-led advisory group that no single wealthy family could control. On the first day the new devices arrived, Maya watched one of her students use a communication screen to tell his mother that he was happy. It was a small sentence. No newspaper printed it. No donor stood nearby to claim credit. Yet Maya thought of Eleanor, of Rose, and of all the people whose names had been hidden in a ledger because someone believed their lives were not impressive enough to matter. That was the lesson Grant Holloway never understood. A person's value is not measured by the room they are allowed to enter, the clothes they can afford, or the power they seem to hold. It is measured by what they do when someone else's dignity is placed in their hands. And sometimes, the person everyone tries to remove from the room is the only one carrying the truth that can save it. If this story moved you, remember this. Never confuse polished appearances with good character. The way someone treats those they believe cannot help them will always reveal more than the words they use in public. At Halston's charity gala, 15-year-old Noah Bennett was accused of stealing the library's most valuable book. They dragged him forward. Everyone watched in silence.
You were trusted here.
Conrad wanted a confession.
What did you think would happen?
Noah refused to lie.
I did not steal it.
The room believed Conrad.
Then explain why you were hiding it.
But Noah had found it.
I found it in a crate.
Because the original was missing.
The original never left this library.
Then Evelyn stepped forward.
Don't let them take that book.
She knew the truth. The displayed book was fake.
The book under glass is a forgery.
Conrad finally looked afraid.
Be careful what you accuse me of.
He did not steal history. He found what you buried.
To understand why, go back 6 weeks. 6 weeks earlier, the Halston Heritage Library had not yet become the center of a scandal. It was still only an old public building on the east side of the city, standing between a bus station and a row of stores that changed owners every few years. Its limestone walls were stained by decades of rain. Its copper roof had darkened almost black. In winter, the pipes groaned beneath the floorboards, and in summer, the upper reading room carried the warm scent of dust, cedar shelves, old paper, and leather bindings that had survived longer than most of the people who once touched them. To wealthy people driving past in black cars, the library looked tired. It occupied valuable land near the river, close to luxury apartments, boutique hotels, and polished glass towers that had begun changing Halston beyond recognition. To developers, it was a property with potential. To city officials, it was a budget problem. To men like Conrad Vale, it was an opportunity waiting to be renamed. But to the people who used it every day, the library was something else entirely. Children came after school because it was quiet, safe, and warm. Older men came because they had nowhere else to sit after retirement. Mothers came to use the computers for job applications. Teenagers came to study, read, hide from arguments at home, or simply spend a few hours in a place where no one expected them to explain why life had become difficult. The library did not ask for proof of income. It did not care where a person slept. It did not demand that anyone explain their past before opening its doors. That was why Evelyn Hart had stayed there for so long. At 57, Evelyn had become the kind of woman people overlooked until they needed something only she could find. She was not loud. She did not dress to be noticed. Her gray-brown hair was always pinned neatly behind her head, and she wore thin cotton gloves whenever she handled old paper. Her clothes were simple, practical, and slightly old-fashioned. She moved through the archive rooms with careful, measured steps, as though every shelf held a memory that deserved respect. Officially, Evelyn was the library's senior archival assistant. It was a title that made her sound like someone who spent her days dusting books and filing records. In truth, she knew more about Halston's history than most of the men who gave speeches about it. She could identify a forged signature by the pressure of the ink. She could tell the age of a document by the fibers in its paper. She knew which streets had vanished beneath new construction, which neighborhoods had been renamed by investors, and which public promises had disappeared the moment money changed hands. Evelyn had built her life around those small traces, because 20 years earlier, she had learned what happened when powerful people believed they could erase them. Before coming to the library, Evelyn had been a forensic auditor for the city of Halston. She had worked in the municipal finance office, reviewing redevelopment budgets, public grants, housing contracts, and infrastructure programs. She had been good at her work. Too good, perhaps, for people who preferred financial reports to remain unread. At the time, Halston had been changing quickly. Old neighborhoods near the river were being cleared for redevelopment. Public housing projects were being repaired, relocated, or quietly abandoned. New foundations appeared every year, promising to rebuild struggling communities. Politicians praised private investment. Newspapers printed photographs of smiling developers standing beside ribbon cuttings and construction sites. One of those developers was Conrad Vale. Even then, Conrad had known how to make ambition sound like compassion. He was younger, hungrier, and far less famous than he would become, but the city already admired him. He spoke about restoring dignity to forgotten neighborhoods. He donated coats during winter drives. He appeared at school fundraisers. He made people feel that Halston's future depended on men like him. Evelyn had not disliked him at first. She had only followed the numbers. The more she reviewed the finances connected to the city's redevelopment programs, the more she noticed patterns that made no sense. Public funds intended for housing repairs were being transferred into charitable accounts. Those accounts paid consulting fees to private firms. The firms were connected to contractors. The contractors were connected to land purchases. The land purchases eventually led back to companies linked to Conrad Vale and his earliest business partners. Nothing had been stolen in one obvious act. That was what made the scheme so difficult to see. The money moved in fragments. It passed through foundations with hopeful names. It was hidden inside consulting contracts, administrative costs, redevelopment fees, and emergency transfers. Each transaction looked harmless by itself. But when Evelyn placed them beside one another, a pattern appeared. Public money was being used to help private interests control public land. Evelyn needed proof before she could report it. She needed someone who understood the city's old records, someone who knew where the original deeds and transfer documents had been stored. That person was Arthur Bennett. Arthur had been a municipal records clerk, quiet, patient, and almost invisible to the people who worked above him. He had no powerful friends. He had no political ambition. He was the kind of man who remembered the exact shelf where a file had been placed 15 years earlier, even after 3 office moves and 2 changes in the archive system. Arthur had recognized the same irregularities Evelyn had found. Several land transfer records had been altered. Dates had been changed. Property classifications had shifted after signatures were supposedly completed. Documents had appeared in folders where they did not belong. Some records carried seals that had not existed at the dates printed on them. Together, Evelyn and Arthur had come close to exposing the truth. Then the documents began disappearing. Before Evelyn could deliver her final report, she was accused of manipulating city financial records. The same spreadsheets she had used to uncover fraud were suddenly presented as evidence against her. Money that had vanished through a complicated network of transfers was blamed on her department. The city needed someone to absorb the scandal, and Evelyn was convenient. She was not wealthy. She was not politically connected. She had no family name that could frighten the people accusing her. Arthur tried to defend her. He submitted notes about altered deeds and missing evidence. He insisted that files had been removed from the archive system, but his warnings were dismissed as paranoia. He was removed from his job. His reputation was damaged. Within months, the city had painted Evelyn as a dishonest auditor, and Arthur as a troubled clerk, unable to accept the conclusions of the investigation. Conrad Vale survived untouched. In fact, he emerged stronger. Over the next 2 decades, his company grew. Vale Horizons built luxury towers, shopping centers, private hospitals, and waterfront districts. Conrad funded scholarships. He donated to museums. He sponsored youth programs. His name appeared on plaques across the city, and Evelyn disappeared. She took temporary work restoring documents. She cataloged private collections. She repaired damaged books. Eventually, the Halston Heritage Library hired her because old paper did not care what the newspapers had once said about her. The library was one of the few places where she could work without hearing whispers whenever she entered a room. For 20 years, Evelyn had not tried to fight her past. She had survived it. Then Conrad Vale announced that he wanted to save the library. The proposal arrived with headlines, television interviews, and photographs of Conrad standing beneath the library's stone archway, while promising a new future for Halston's children. Vale Horizons would invest $40 million into a modern educational complex called the Vale Center for Tomorrow. The plan included a technology wing, a media lab, a scholarship center, a renovated children's library, and a sleek glass structure extending toward the river. The city celebrated before most people read the details. The mayor praised Conrad's generosity. The library board called it a miracle. Newspapers described the project as a lifeline for an aging institution that could no longer survive on public funding alone. People who had never visited the library suddenly had opinions about how it should be transformed. But Evelyn saw what the others did not. The agreement required the city to lease the library property to Vale Horizons for 99 years. The library itself would remain open, at least in theory. But much of the surrounding land would be converted into private retail space, corporate offices, luxury cafes, and event halls. The old building would become the decorative center of a much larger commercial project. It would survive as an image, not as a promise. Evelyn understood the danger immediately. A public library did not belong to the city officials who happened to manage it. It belonged to the people who needed it. And once the land was given to a private company for nearly a century, there would be no easy way to take it back. She began studying the legal documents late at night. Most of the agreement had been carefully written by expensive lawyers. But near the end of the planning folder, hidden behind technical maps and development schedules, Evelyn found an amendment dated 1978. It claimed that the original terms of the library's founding agreement had been changed decades earlier, allowing the city to transfer the property for private development under certain conditions. At first glance, the document looked convincing. The language was formal. The seal appeared official. The pages were yellowed enough to suggest age. The signatures looked authentic. It was exactly the sort of paper most people accepted without question, because it looked old and complicated. But Evelyn had spent too long studying the small places where lies failed. The seal at the bottom of the amendment belonged to a municipal archive classification system created in 1986. The paper contained a fiber blend that had not been used in city documents during the 1970s. The typeface was correct for the era, but the spacing between lines matched a template introduced years later. The document claimed to have been filed in 1978, yet the reference number followed a code system that did not exist until the late 80s. Someone had created an old lie using new tools. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her small apartment on Grant Street, surrounded by copied documents and handwritten notes. Trucks rumbled below her window. The laundromat downstairs had closed hours earlier, leaving the building quiet except for the low hum of old machines. A mug of tea cooled beside her lamp as she compared the forged amendment to real city records. The more she studied it, the more certain she became. Someone was trying to steal the library without calling it theft. The next morning, Evelyn brought her findings to Martin Gage, the library director. Martin was not a bad man. He had spent years trying to keep the library open through funding cuts, staff reductions, and public indifference. He had the tired face of someone who had learned to celebrate every small victory because larger victories no longer seemed possible. Evelyn explained the inconsistencies. She showed him the mismatched archive seal. She pointed out the paper fibers, the date problem, and the wrong filing system. Martin listened. He looked uneasy. He turned the pages slowly. Then he told her that the city legal department had already approved the agreement. Conrad Vale's team had spent months preparing the proposal. The library board had accepted the documents as legitimate. Martin suggested that Evelyn might be viewing the situation through the pain of what had happened to her years earlier. He did not accuse her of lying. That would have been easier. Instead, he implied that her past had made her suspicious of everything. Evelyn left his office without arguing. Downstairs, in the reading room, Noah Bennett was sorting returned books onto a cart. He was 15, thin, dark-haired, and taller than people expected when they first saw him. His clothes were clean but worn. The sleeves of his jacket had frayed at the cuffs, and his shoes had been repaired with black tape near the soles. Noah had been coming to the library for nearly a year. He lived in a foster home on the other side of Halston, with a couple who were doing their best, but already had too many responsibilities. There were other children in the house, too many rules, and not enough quiet. Noah had moved through 4 placements in 6 years. He had learned not to unpack fully. He had learned not to ask whether a room was really his. He had learned that adults often said they wanted honesty, but only when honesty was easy to hear. At the library, no one asked him to explain himself. He volunteered after school. He organized donations, repaired loose book covers, helped older patrons use the computers, and spent hours reading local history. He liked maps, old newspapers, photographs, land records, and anything that revealed how the city had become what it was. He liked history, because history proved that people had existed even when the world tried to forget them. Evelyn had noticed him long before they became friends. At first, Noah had been another quiet boy sitting alone near the window. But then he began asking questions that surprised her. He wanted to know why old books sometimes had handwritten notes in the margins. He wanted to know why city maps showed streets that no longer existed. He wanted to know who decided what was worth preserving. One afternoon, Noah brought Evelyn a small brass key. It was heavy for its size, with a worn oval head and a symbol engraved near the shaft. The symbol looked like a lantern inside a circle. Noah explained that the key had belonged to his grandfather, Arthur Bennett. It was one of only 2 things Noah had left from him, along with an old photograph. When Evelyn looked at the photograph, the past reached out and took hold of her. Arthur Bennett stood beside a younger woman in an office filled with file boxes and folders. The woman wore a navy blouse and had dark hair pulled back from her face. She looked focused, determined, and far less tired than Evelyn remembered feeling during those years. The woman was Evelyn. For several seconds, she could not speak. Noah had never known the full story about his grandfather. He only knew that Arthur had worked for the city, had always spoken about truth, and had died before Noah was old enough to understand why adults avoided mentioning his name. Evelyn turned the brass key over in her gloved hand. The lantern symbol belonged to an old archival system. Before Halston digitized most sensitive records, certain files had been stored in locked cabinets beneath the library. The cabinet numbers were rarely listed in public records. Only longtime municipal employees knew they existed. That evening, after the public rooms closed, Evelyn took Noah down to the lower archive level. The basement corridor was narrow and cold. The lights hummed overhead. The stone walls carried the scent of damp paper and old dust. At the far end of the hallway stood several metal cabinets that had not been opened in years. Most were rusted. Some were sealed with outdated evidence labels. One cabinet bore the same lantern symbol as Noah's key, almost hidden beneath layers of paint. Noah placed the key in the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mechanism turned. Inside, they found a cardboard box tied with brittle twine, several reels of microfilm, a packet of photographs, and a sealed envelope with Arthur Bennett's name written across the front in faded blue ink. Evelyn knew she should have contacted the city archives office immediately. She knew the rules. She knew the procedure. But when she saw Arthur's handwriting, she could not treat the moment like routine paperwork. The envelope contained a letter Arthur had written shortly before his death. It did not include a dramatic confession. It did not name every person involved. Arthur had been too careful for that. Instead, he wrote about fear. He wrote that the evidence they had found had been scattered, altered, and hidden in places no one would think to search. He wrote that Conrad Vale had never feared truth as much as he feared connections. A single document could be dismissed. A witness could be discredited. But if the old records were placed beside one another, they would reveal what had been done. Arthur believed the truth was still alive. It had simply been buried beneath the things powerful people considered worthless. At the bottom of the letter, he had left a sequence of dates, symbols, and file references. Evelyn recognized the system immediately. They were cross-references to municipal filings, redevelopment ledgers, library trust records, and financial documents connected to a charitable foundation that no longer officially existed. The name on the foundation was Vale Community Futures. It was one of Conrad Vale's first philanthropic organizations. Over the following days, Evelyn and Noah worked quietly. Noah helped copy reference codes, organize old files, and compare public records with the materials Arthur had left behind. He did not complain about the boring work. He had Arthur's patience in him, though he did not yet understand how deeply his grandfather had shaped him. Together, They found proof that the library land had never belonged to the city in the ordinary way. The property had been donated in 1912 by Margaret Halston, whose family had funded the original building. Her founding trust included a condition that had slowly disappeared from public summaries over the decades. The land had been given for permanent community use. It could not be sold, leased, transferred, or converted into a private commercial project. If the city ever attempted to do so, ownership would automatically revert to an independent public trust established by Margaret Halston herself. The entire Vale Horizons project depended on that condition remaining hidden, and the condition was recorded inside the original Founders Register. The Founders Register was an enormous leather-bound ledger stored in the library's climate-controlled vault. It contained the names of the original trustees, the first donations, the land agreement, and Margaret Halston's handwritten founding conditions. 3 days after Evelyn and Noah discovered the clause, the library board announced that the Founders Register would be displayed as the centerpiece of the upcoming Halston Heritage Gala. The gala was being promoted as a celebration of the library's future. Conrad Vale would be honored as the man who had saved the building. Donors, politicians, reporters, and business leaders would gather beneath the stained glass ceiling. The original register would be placed under glass as a symbol of the library's history and its bright new beginning. Evelyn read the announcement twice. Then she went to the vault. The Founders Register was still on its shelf. At first, she almost felt relieved. The leather cover was the right color. The gold lettering appeared worn. The binding carried the same floral pattern. Everything looked exactly as it should. But Evelyn had handled the original register twice before in her career, and she remembered one small detail no copy could easily imitate. Near the lower corner of the true cover was a dark water stain left by the flood of 1947. The book in the vault had no stain. Evelyn stood perfectly still. Someone had already replaced the original. And somewhere inside Halston, Conrad Vale now had the one document that could destroy everything he was trying to build. Evelyn did not touch the false register again until she had taken photographs of every detail that proved it was a replacement. She photographed the smooth lower corner where the flood stain should have been. She photographed the stitching along the spine, too even and too clean for a book more than a century old. She photographed the pages under angled light, revealing fibers that did not match paper made in 1912. Then she went to Martin Gage one last time. This time she did not arrive with a theory. She arrived with evidence. Martin listened behind the closed door of his office, while Evelyn laid the photographs across his desk. Outside, the library remained busy. Children moved through the reading room. A printer hummed near the public computers. Someone laughed softly near the circulation counter. The ordinary sounds made the conversation feel even more unreal. Evelyn explained that the Founders Register in the vault was not genuine. She explained that the true book contained the original land condition, preventing the library property from being leased for private development. She showed him the forged amendment from 1978 and the archive details that proved it had been created years later. Martin did not deny that the evidence looked troubling, but he was afraid of what the truth would cost. The gala was only days away. Conrad Vale's foundation had already paid for the event. City officials had confirmed their attendance. Newspapers had promised coverage. The library board had built its entire future around the announcement of the Vale Center for tomorrow. If Evelyn was right, the project would not merely be delayed, it could collapse completely. Martin told her that accusing Conrad Vale without official proof would be reckless. He warned that the board would see her actions as sabotage. He said that the city could not survive another public scandal involving the library. Evelyn understood what he was really saying. He believed the library needed Conrad more than it needed the truth. That afternoon, she was placed on administrative suspension. The letter was written in polite language. It claimed that she had accessed restricted material without authorization and caused unnecessary disruption during an important institutional transition. She was instructed not to enter the archive rooms until further notice. For the second time in her life, Evelyn watched a powerful system turn procedure into punishment. The first time, she had been younger. She had still believed that someone would eventually step in and ask what had truly happened. This time, she knew better. She did not argue. She gathered her gloves, her notebook, and the few personal items she kept in her archive drawer. Then she walked through the library without saying goodbye to anyone. Most of the staff avoided looking at her. A few looked sorry. None of them stopped her. That was the part Evelyn would remember most clearly. Not the suspension letter, not Martin's fear, not even the knowledge that Conrad Vale had found a way to rewrite history inside the very building meant to preserve it. What she remembered was how easy it had been for people to remain silent when silence protected them. Noah learned about Evelyn's suspension the following day. He had arrived after school carrying a stack of returned books, unaware that he was no longer supposed to be there. The circulation desk employee told him quietly that his volunteer access had been paused. She would not explain why. At first, Noah thought it was because of Evelyn. Then the security supervisor approached him with a rare 19th century atlas in his hands. The atlas had been found beneath the table where Noah usually studied. It was one of the most valuable items in the special collection. Its pages were delicate, its maps hand-colored, and its cover embossed with the seal of the old Halston Survey Office. It should never have been left in the public reading room. Yet there it was, beneath Noah's chair, as though someone had placed it there specifically to be discovered. Noah said he had never touched it. The supervisor did not accuse him directly. He did something more damaging. He made it clear that the library could no longer trust him around valuable materials. Noah stood in the lobby holding the volunteer badge he had worn for almost a year. Around him, people continued walking past the front desk. Some glanced at him. Most did not. He knew what they saw. A foster kid with worn shoes. A quiet boy without parents beside him. Someone easy to blame because people already believed he probably had a reason to take what did not belong to him. By the end of the day, Noah had been barred from volunteering. He did not tell Evelyn immediately. He waited until evening, then went to her apartment on Grant Street, carrying the suspension letter from the library and the brass key that had belonged to Arthur Bennett. Rain had soaked the shoulders of his jacket. His hair clung to his forehead. He tried to act as though the letter did not matter, but Evelyn saw the way he held it. The library had been one of the only places where Noah had felt wanted without being examined. It had been a place where he could sit beside other people without worrying about whether they knew his history. A place where he could be useful. A place where his questions were welcomed. Now it had become another door closing in his face. Evelyn wanted to tell him that none of this was his fault, but she knew those words would not be enough. Instead, she showed him the evidence she had copied before leaving the archive. The photographs of the fake register, the forged 1978 amendment, Arthur's letter, the notes about the hidden land condition. She told him that the people responsible wanted both of them out of the way because they were getting too close. Noah listened without interrupting. Then he asked the question Evelyn had been trying not to ask herself. If Conrad Vale had taken the real register, where had he put it? The answer came the following morning. Noah had gone behind the library to throw away a bag of old newspapers for his foster mother. Near the recycling bins, he noticed several boxes from Vale Community Futures stacked beside the loading dock. Most were empty packaging from gala decorations, but one crumpled sheet of paper had blown loose from the top of a bin. It was a delivery manifest. The document listed several crates scheduled to arrive before the Halston Heritage Gala. One crate was marked as historical display material. Another carried a more private label, archival handling, restricted access. At the bottom of the page was a reference code. Noah did not recognize it. But when he brought the manifest to Evelyn, she went pale. The code matched one of the references Arthur Bennett had written beneath his letter. It was not a random number. It was an old city archive designation used for sensitive materials moved without public cataloging. The true Founders Register had not been destroyed. It was being transported, and Conrad Vale was planning to bring it into the library on the night of the gala. At first, Evelyn wanted Noah to stay away. She had already seen what Conrad's people were willing to do. They had planted the Atlas. They had turned the library staff against him. They had made him look suspicious before he had done anything wrong. But Noah had spent too much of his life being told to sit quietly while adults made choices that changed everything around him. He did not want to be reckless. He did not want revenge. He only wanted to stop someone from erasing the truth the way Arthur Bennett's truth had been erased. Evelyn understood that feeling better than anyone, so they made a plan. Evelyn would attend the gala even though she had not been invited. She would remain near the public entrance, where the press and city officials would be gathered. Noah would not confront Conrad. He would only look for the delivery crate and confirm whether the original register was inside. If he found it, he would not touch it. He would send Evelyn a message. The plan sounded simple, but nothing involving Conrad Vale had ever been simple. On the night of the gala, the Halston Heritage Library no longer looked like itself. The children's tables had been removed. The public computers were covered in black cloth. White flowers stood in silver vases beneath the marble staircase. A long carpet stretched through the main reading room, where students usually sat with notebooks and tired parents usually searched for work online. The library had become a ballroom. Guests in tuxedos and gowns arrived beneath strings of warm lights. City officials posed for photographs. Donors drank champagne beneath the stained glass ceiling. A small orchestra played near the old reference desk. At the center of the room, beneath a narrow beam of light, the fake Founders Register rested inside a glass display case. Conrad Vale stood nearby in a black dinner jacket, wearing a silver pin shaped like an open book. He smiled for cameras. He greeted politicians by name. He spoke about education, opportunity, and the future of Halston, with the ease of a man who had spent his life learning how to make people believe that wealth and goodness were the same thing. The guests loved him. They saw the billionaire who had promised $40 million. They saw the philanthropist who wanted to save an old library. They saw the man who had built towers, schools, foundations, and a reputation so polished that few people remembered what might be hidden beneath it. They did not see the forged amendment. They did not see the stolen register. They did not see the evidence Arthur Bennett had hidden 20 years earlier. Noah entered through the service corridor shortly before the main speech began. He wore a borrowed navy suit that was slightly too large at the shoulders. The sleeves were long. The shoes hurt his feet. His tie was not perfectly straight. He looked like a boy trying to belong in a room built for people who had never been told that they did not. Near the loading area, behind temporary catering stations and stacks of wine boxes, Noah found the crate marked for private archival handling. The Vale Community Futures logo was stamped across the side. His heart began to race. The crate had been placed behind a curtain beside flower supplies and event equipment. It was not locked. That seemed wrong to Noah. Something so important should have been guarded. But perhaps Conrad had believed no one would ever look there. Noah carefully lifted the lid. Inside, beneath layers of foam and packing paper, was the original Founder's Register. He recognized it instantly. The leather cover bore the dark water stain near the lower corner. The binding looked older, heavier, and more fragile than the polished imitation displayed beneath the ballroom lights. For a moment, Noah could only stare. He thought of Arthur Bennett. He thought of Evelyn. He thought of the atlas planted beneath his table. He thought of every time someone had looked at his foster care file before they looked at his face. Then he made the decision that would change everything. He lifted the register from the crate. He intended to carry it only far enough to show Evelyn. He never made it out of the corridor. 2 security guards appeared before he reached the service door. They moved too quickly. They did not ask why he had the register. They did not ask how he found it. They did not seem surprised at all. They took the book from his hands and led him toward the ballroom. At that exact moment, the orchestra began to fade. And beneath the stained glass ceiling, surrounded by donors, politicians, and cameras, Conrad Vale was preparing to tell the city what kind of future he believed it deserved. When the security guards escorted Noah Bennett into the ballroom, the orchestra had just fallen silent. The sound disappeared so suddenly that the room seemed to hold its breath. Hundreds of guests turned toward the boy in the borrowed Navy suit. Under the stained glass ceiling of the Halston Heritage Library, Noah looked smaller than he had only minutes earlier. His hands were empty now. The old Founder's Register had been taken from him and held by one of the guards as though it were proof of a crime. Conrad Vale stood near the center of the room, surrounded by donors, city officials, cameras, and people who had spent the evening praising his generosity. He did not rush forward. He did not raise his voice. He understood that real power rarely needed to shout. Instead, he looked at Noah with carefully measured disappointment. To the guests, it seemed obvious what had happened. A foster boy had been found in a private service corridor, carrying the most valuable historical document in the library. The evidence looked simple. The story felt complete. And because Noah was young, poor, unknown, and already viewed with suspicion by people who had never bothered to know him, most of the room had decided he was guilty before anyone asked a single question. No one asked why a frightened 15-year-old would steal a book he could not sell. No one asked why security found him so quickly. No one asked why the original register had been stored inside a crate belonging to Conrad Vale's own foundation. They only saw what Conrad wanted them to see. The billionaire spoke to the room with a sadness that sounded almost compassionate. He described Noah as a young person who had been given an opportunity by the library, by the community, and by the very people gathered there that evening. He made it seem as though Noah had betrayed kindness. He made the guests feel sorrow for him, while quietly convincing them that he could not be trusted. It was a performance Conrad had perfected over decades. He knew how to make cruelty look like concern. Noah stood still beneath the stained glass ceiling, his face pale and his shoulders tense. He had spent years learning that when adults had already made up their minds, speaking too much could make things worse. So he said nothing. He only looked toward the rear entrance of the ballroom. That was when Evelyn Hart stepped into the room. She was not dressed like the other guests. She wore a simple dark coat over a plain dress. Her gray-brown hair was pinned neatly behind her head, and beneath one arm she carried the leather portfolio containing every piece of evidence she had managed to collect before Conrad's people pushed her out of the library. For a moment, no one noticed her. Then Conrad Vale did. His expression changed only slightly. It was small enough that most people missed it. But Evelyn saw the shift in his eyes. For the first time that night, the man who had controlled every detail of the gala looked uncertain. Evelyn walked past the donors, the board members, the city officials, and the photographers. She moved without hurry, but she did not hesitate. She had spent 20 years avoiding rooms like this one. 20 years allowing people to remember her as the woman who had supposedly betrayed the city. 20 years carrying the knowledge that the truth had been buried because no one important wanted to hear it. But this was no longer only about her. It was about Noah. It was about Arthur Bennett. It was about a library that had been built for people who had nowhere else to go. Evelyn stopped beside Noah and looked directly at the Founders Register in the guard's hands. Then she looked toward the glass display case in the center of the ballroom. Inside the case, beneath a narrow beam of warm light, rested another version of the Founders Register. The guests did not understand what they were seeing. 2 old leather books could look nearly identical from a distance, but Evelyn did not need to touch them to know which one was real. The register beneath the glass was the forgery. The book Noah had found was the original. Evelyn told the room that Noah had not stolen anything. The real Founders Register had been removed from the library vault and replaced with a false copy. Noah had found the original book hidden inside a crate, marked for private archival handling, a crate delivered by Vale Community Futures. A ripple moved through the crowd. Conrad responded calmly. He suggested that Evelyn was making another accusation without proof. He reminded the guests, in careful and indirect language, that she had once been involved in a financial scandal with the city. He wanted the room to remember her as a disgraced former auditor, not as the woman standing before them with evidence. It was the same weapon he had used 20 years earlier. But Evelyn had not come unprepared. She opened her portfolio and placed several photographs on a nearby table. The first showed the original register's old water stain, the dark mark near the lower corner of the leather cover caused by the Halston flood of 1947. The second showed the book currently displayed beneath the glass, smooth and spotless in the exact place where the stain should have been. The third showed the forged 1978 amendment that had supposedly allowed the library land to be leased to Vale Horizons. Then Evelyn began explaining the details. The register in the display case had been made with modern leather. Its gold edges had been chemically aged. Its thread stitching was too regular, too clean, and too new. The paper inside carried a watermark from a mill that did not exist in 1912. The pages had been machine-trimmed, while the original book's pages were uneven because they had been cut by hand. To many people in the room, those differences seemed small, but small details were often where lies failed. Evelyn pointed toward the register Noah had found. The true book carried the old flood stain. Its leather had darkened naturally over more than a century. Its binding was heavier. Its paper showed the irregular fibers of handmade archival stock. Every mark on it told the story of time. The forgery only told the story of someone trying to erase that time. A woman near the front stepped forward. Her name was Dr. Maya Collins, a historical preservation professor from Halston University. Conrad had invited her to the gala because he expected her to praise the renovation project and speak about the importance of preserving the library's heritage. Instead, She examined Evelyn's photographs, then looked carefully at the book beneath the glass, and finally turned toward the register held by security. Her expression tightened. She confirmed that Evelyn was correct. The book in the display case was not the original Founders Register. It was a reproduction. The ballroom changed in an instant. Until that moment, Conrad Vale had controlled the story. He had been the benefactor. Noah had been the thief. Evelyn had been the bitter former employee trying to ruin a charitable evening. But now, with one expert confirmation, the entire room had to consider another possibility. What if the boy had been telling the truth? What if the woman they had dismissed was right? What if the man they had spent years admiring was hiding something far worse than a forged book? Conrad tried to regain control. He suggested that the reproduction might have been created for preservation purposes. He implied that his foundation had simply handled the materials incorrectly. He said the original register may have been moved without his knowledge. But Evelyn placed the delivery manifest beside the photographs. It showed the private archival crate scheduled through Vale Community Futures. The reference number matched one of Arthur Bennett's old archival codes. Then Evelyn revealed the photograph Noah had found online, taken earlier that evening by a catering employee. In the background, clearly visible behind the flower arrangements, was the crate being moved into the loading area by a Vale Community Futures staff member. The register had not been misplaced. It had been hidden. And it had been hidden by people connected directly to Conrad Vale. Noah finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the room because no one else moved. He explained that he had found the real register inside the crate. He said he had recognized the water stain because Evelyn had described it to him. He did not claim to understand every detail. He did not try to sound brave. He simply told the truth. And because he did not ask for sympathy, the truth sounded stronger. For the first time that night, the guests looked at Noah differently. They no longer saw a foster boy caught with stolen property. They saw a child who had been placed at the center of a lie. Evelyn asked the guard to place the real Founders Register on the table. Dr. Collins put on archival gloves. Evelyn did the same. Together, they opened the heavy leather cover. The first pages contained the names of the original trustees, the handwritten donations that funded the building, and the founding records of the library. The ink had faded from black to brown, but it was still readable. The pages were delicate, but they carried the weight of a century. Then Evelyn turned to the section that mattered most. There, in Margaret Halston's original handwriting, was the condition that Conrad Vale had tried to erase. The land beneath the library had been donated for permanent public use. It could not be sold, leased, transferred, or converted into private commercial property. If the city ever attempted to use the land for private development, ownership would automatically revert to the Halston Community Trust. The Vale Center for Tomorrow had been built on an illegal promise. The 99-year lease Conrad planned to use was invalid. His $40 million donation had never been a rescue plan. It had been the first step in taking control of land that did not belong to him. The room became quieter than before. Somewhere near the back, a glass touched the floor and shattered. But the biggest revelation had not yet arrived. Evelyn had spent days studying Arthur Bennett's letter. She had understood that his codes were more than references to missing files. They were instructions. Arthur had hidden something inside the one object Conrad would never dare destroy openly. Near the back cover of the Founders Register, beneath a narrow strip of worn leather, Evelyn found an old stitched seam. It had been repaired after the flood decades earlier. To anyone else, it looked like ordinary restoration work. But Arthur had known the library well. He had known that old repairs were often ignored, because people assumed they had no importance. He had trusted that one day, someone would understand the clue he had left behind. Evelyn carefully loosened the seam. Inside the spine of the register was a folded packet wrapped in wax paper. The packet had been hidden there for 20 years. Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside were 3 things. The first was a notarized statement written by Arthur Bennett. In it, he described how he and Evelyn had uncovered altered land records, falsified redevelopment contracts, and diverted public funds linked to Conrad Vale's earliest business operations. The second was a duplicate ledger containing transaction codes that matched the irregularities Evelyn had discovered before the city accused her of fraud. The third was a list of account numbers, shell companies, transfer dates, and financial references connecting Vale Community Futures to the same network of accounts that had existed 20 years earlier under different names. The past had not disappeared. Arthur had preserved it. He had hidden it inside the very book Conrad had tried to replace with a beautiful lie. Conrad reached toward the table. It was only a small movement, but everyone saw it. Until that moment, he had remained composed. Men like Conrad Vale did not collapse the way ordinary people imagined. They had spent too many years practicing dignity in public. But when he saw Arthur's statement in Evelyn's hands, the color left his face. He knew exactly what the documents meant. The forged amendment connected to the false register. The false register connected to the illegal lease. The lease connected to Vale Horizons. The ledger connected to the redevelopment fraud from 20 years earlier. And the old case against Evelyn Hart was no longer a forgotten scandal. It was evidence. The ballroom did not erupt at once. At first, people simply stared. The mayor stepped away from Conrad. The library board chair lowered her glass. Reporters began moving closer, their phones raised, their cameras recording. Dr. Collins continued examining the documents. Her silence carried more weight than any dramatic announcement. Then someone from the city attorney's office stepped forward and requested that the founder's register, Arthur's statement, the ledger, and all related transfer documents be secured immediately. The gala was suspended. The auction never began. Conrad tried to speak privately with the board members, but privacy had disappeared from the room. The donors who had praised him all evening were suddenly eager to distance themselves. The officials who supported the lease began insisting that they had trusted the legal review process. The people who had benefited from Conrad's power discovered that they had never really known him. That was not entirely true. Some of them had known enough. They had simply decided that knowing was less important than staying close to him. Noah was released from security custody before the police even arrived. The guards apologized in the stiff, uncomfortable way people apologized when they realized they had treated a child like a criminal because it was easier than questioning a wealthy man. Noah did not say much. His hands were still shaking. Evelyn stood beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Noah looked at the old photograph Evelyn had brought in her portfolio. Arthur Bennett stood beside the younger version of Evelyn, both of them surrounded by file boxes and records that no one had wanted to believe. For the first time, Noah understood that his grandfather had not died as a forgotten man. Arthur had spent his final years protecting the truth for people he would never live long enough to meet. And Evelyn understood something too. Arthur had trusted the future more than he had trusted the present. He had hidden the evidence because he believed that someday, someone would be brave enough to find it. The first headlines appeared before midnight. By morning, Halston was no longer talking about Conrad Vale's donation. It was talking about forged documents, hidden ledgers, a stolen historical register, and a foster boy who had been accused of theft while holding the evidence that could expose one of the city's most powerful men. The investigation did not end in a single night. Real justice rarely does. For weeks, state auditors examined records connected to Vale Horizons, Vale Community Futures, and several companies that had been created and dissolved over the past 2 decades. Investigators reopened the case against Evelyn Hart. Former city employees were interviewed. Some had been too afraid to speak years earlier. Some had seen files disappear. Some had been pressured to revise dates, remove pages, or approve financial transfers they did not understand. One former accountant described being told that certain payments should never be questioned because Conrad Vale had influential friends. Another employee from Vale Community Futures provided internal emails showing that the original founder's register had been moved without library authorization. A retired clerk confirmed that Arthur Bennett had warned the city about altered deeds long before he was dismissed. The deeper investigators looked, the more they found. Conrad Vale had not built his entire empire through fraud. That was what made the truth even more disturbing. His businesses had been large enough, successful enough, and respectable enough on the surface to hide the parts that were not. He had used real projects, real donations, and real public goodwill as cover for a pattern of manipulation that had begun long before most people at the gala knew his name. The library lease was canceled. The city was forced to acknowledge that the land could not be transferred for private benefit. The Halston Community Trust took legal control of the property under Margaret Halston's original founding condition. The old building would remain public. Conrad's commercial development plan was abandoned. His foundation board removed him from leadership. Major donors withdrew support. Politicians who had once praised him began claiming they had been deceived. His company lost contracts. His reputation, built carefully over decades, began to collapse under the weight of documents he had assumed no one would ever find. Months later, Conrad Vale was charged with document forgery, financial fraud, obstruction of a public investigation, conspiracy to manipulate municipal records, and the false accusation of a minor. He was not destroyed because someone shouted louder than he did. He was destroyed because the records he had ignored finally spoke louder than his reputation. That was the poetic justice of it. Conrad had spent his life believing that buildings were valuable only when they could be turned into profit. He had looked at the library and seen land waiting to be claimed. He had looked at old documents and seen clutter. He had looked at Evelyn Hart and seen a woman whose name could be buried. He had looked at Noah Bennett and seen a boy nobody would defend. But in the end, the old library became the place where his lies were exposed. The papers he considered useless became the evidence that ended his control. The woman he thought he had ruined became the person who restored the truth. And the boy he called a thief became the reason the truth survived long enough to be found. Evelyn's exoneration came quietly. There was no parade, no grand television special, no famous speaker standing beneath the stained glass ceiling. Instead, the city attorney's office released a formal statement confirming that the case against her had been built on manipulated evidence and incomplete records. Her name was cleared. Her professional license was restored. The city issued an apology that was far too brief for 20 years of damage. But it was more than Evelyn had once believed she would ever receive. Martin Gage visited her several weeks later. He looked older than he had before the gala. He admitted that he had failed her. He had wanted to protect the library, but in doing so, he had protected the people trying to take it away. He had confused caution with integrity. Evelyn did not forgive him easily. She did not need to. Forgiveness was not pretending that nothing had happened. She made him understand that institutions were not saved by avoiding conflict. They were saved by refusing to abandon the people who tried to protect them. Martin stepped down as library director at the end of the year. The Halston Community Trust asked Evelyn to return as director of public archives and historical preservation. At first, she hesitated. The title felt too large. The office felt too close to the life she had once lost. But Noah reminded her that the library had never needed someone who looked important. It needed someone who understood what was worth protecting. So Evelyn accepted. The first project she approved was the restoration of the lower archive wing. The second was the creation of the Arthur Bennett Reading Room. It was not a grand hall with marble plaques and expensive furniture. It was a warm, bright room on the first floor where children could read, study, use computers, ask for help with schoolwork, and learn how to search public records. A framed photograph of Arthur Bennett hung near the entrance beside a small brass plaque describing him as a city records clerk who had protected the truth when few others would. Noah attended the opening ceremony in a suit that actually fit. He did not become a millionaire. He did not suddenly inherit a mansion or receive some impossible reward that solved every problem in his life. His foster care situation did not magically become easy. There were still forms, meetings, uncertainty, and memories that could not disappear because one wealthy man had finally been exposed. But Noah was no longer alone. The library hired him as a paid youth archive assistant. He learned how to preserve paper, repair damaged bindings, search municipal databases, and trace the history of buildings that other people passed without noticing. He began taking evening classes through a local college program. For the first time, he had adults who did not see him as a file number or a problem waiting to happen. He had a place where his curiosity was not treated like trouble. He had a future that did not depend on someone else deciding whether he deserved one. Nearly a year after the gala, Noah returned to the lower archive room where Arthur's letter had been found. Evelyn was there, sorting a box of newly cataloged documents. The old brass key rested in Noah's palm. For a long time, he looked at it without speaking. Then he placed it inside a small display case beside Arthur's photograph. The key had once represented a locked past. It had been the only thing Noah carried from a grandfather he barely remembered. But now it meant something different. It was no longer a reminder of what had been hidden. It was proof that some doors stayed closed only until the right person found the courage to open them. The Halston Heritage Library remained standing. The roof was repaired, but not with Conrad's money. Community groups raised funds. Former students returned to donate. Local businesses contributed without demanding that their names be carved into stone. The city restored public support after learning, through humiliation, that libraries were not private charities for the wealthy to rescue. They were public promises. And every day, people continued coming through the library's doors. Children came to read. Parents came to fill out job applications. Older patrons came to sit by the windows. Teenagers came to study or hide from the rain. Most of them never knew every detail of the scandal that had saved the building. They did not need to. The lights were on. The shelves were full. The doors remained open to anyone. That was enough. But Evelyn never forgot the lesson hidden inside Arthur Bennett's letter. Truth does not disappear because it is weak. Sometimes it disappears because powerful people train everyone else to look away. They make doubt feel embarrassing. They make questions feel dangerous. They make ordinary people believe that wealth, confidence, and public applause are the same thing as goodness. But they are not. And in the end, it took a quiet archivist, a foster boy everyone was ready to blame, and a book full of forgotten pages to remind an entire city that dignity does not belong only to those who can afford to defend themselves. Sometimes the people treated as invisible are the only ones still paying attention. Sometimes the things everyone calls old are the only witnesses that never lie. And sometimes justice begins the moment one person decides that silence has lasted long enough. If you believe that truth deserves to be protected, even when powerful people try to bury it, share this story and tell us what you would have done if you had been in that room. 3 hours before the Saravan Cultural Council arrived to challenge Arden Museum's ownership, the museum's brightest scholars were losing a battle against a piece of clay.
We cannot let the council see uncertainty.
Then a soaked 17-year-old girl walked into the lobby, carrying a torn backpack and a volunteer application. Her name was Nadia Reyes.
Are you here for the shelter referral program?
Nadia shook her head. She had not come to ask for help. She had seen a flyer and came to apply as a volunteer.
No, I saw a flyer and came to apply as a volunteer.
But when she glanced at the digital scan of the ancient charter, her expression changed. She stepped closer to the screen.
That tablet is upside down.
The scholars turned toward Nadia in disbelief. Dr. Julian Mercer noticed her claim, not with curiosity, but with immediate contempt.
You are saying every scholar in this building has been reading it wrong?
Dr. Mercer asked where exactly she had learned to read a language trained experts had struggled with for years.
And where exactly did you learn what trained experts could not?
Nadia tightened her grip on her backpack. Then she answered that her mother had taught her everything she knew.
My mother taught me.
Then Nadia looked directly at Mercer and said the name he had hoped never to hear again, Elena Reyes.
Elena Reyes.
For the first time that morning, Dr. Julian Mercer looked afraid. The lobby became so quiet that Nadia could hear rain striking the windows. Mercer called Elena a former employee who had worked briefly as a restoration technician, trying to make Nadia's mother sound insignificant.
Your mother worked here briefly. That is all.
Nadia said the writing was not meant to be read from left to right, and that the marks along the edge were directional guides.
Those marks are not cracks. They tell you where to begin.
Nadia explained that the sentence began at the border and curved inward. Her mother had given that route a name Mercer clearly recognized.
My mother called it the Guardian's Path.
My mother called it the Guardian's Path, Nadia said. The phrase landed heavily. Mercer's expression tightened before he could stop it. The Guardian's Path. It was not a phrase a teenager would have invented. It was not something she could have guessed from a quick glance at the screen. Elena had used those exact words in her notes. They had appeared in the report Mercer had hoped would disappear forever. The junior scholars gathered closer to the monitor. One enlarged the lower border. Another brought up older scans. A third began comparing the marks against a database of known Saravan inscriptions. Their movements became slower and more deliberate. The confidence they had shown before Nadia entered the lobby had begun to dissolve. For weeks, they had been trapped inside one interpretation. They had assumed the tablet was a sale agreement because the museum had always called it one. They had assumed the first line named an owner because every exhibition label, donor brochure, and academic summary said it did. They had not tested the possibility that the first line was being read in reverse. Evelyn Hart noticed the shift. She had been standing near the reception desk moments earlier, balancing a phone call from the board with messages from legal counsel and a growing stack of problems that no one else seemed willing to solve. Evelyn was not a historian. She did not claim to understand ancient languages. Her work was more immediate and less romantic. She managed budgets, staff conflicts, insurance concerns, donors, building permits, public relations disasters, and the 1,000 small emergencies that kept Arden Museum functioning. But she understood risk, and the silence around the research screen was beginning to sound like risk. She ended her call and stepped closer. Her eyes moved from the tablet to Nadia, then from Nadia to Mercer. She asked whether the reading direction had ever been tested, using the border marks as guides. No one answered immediately. That hesitation mattered. Mercer stepped in before the silence became too revealing. He said the team had examined all reasonable possibilities. He reminded Evelyn that the document had been studied by senior experts from several institutions. He warned that a museum facing an international legal challenge could not allow an unverified theory to disrupt months of preparation. He sounded calm, but he was speaking too quickly. Nadia saw it. Owen Blake saw it too. Owen was the security guard who had opened the side entrance for Nadia less than an hour earlier. At first, he had thought she had come inside to get out of the rain. Her jacket was old, her shoes were soaked, and the backpack on her shoulder looked as though it had been repaired more times than most people repaired anything. He had almost sent her away. Now he stood near the edge of the lobby, watching the museum's most respected scholar become unsettled by a phrase from an old notebook. Owen did not know the difference between a trade agreement and a custodial covenant. He did not understand Saravan grammar or ancient border signs, but he knew how people behaved when they were trying to hide fear beneath authority. Nadia continued before Mercer could close the conversation. She explained that the opening symbols did not appear to describe a sale. The grammar was wrong for that. If the border marks were followed, the first sequence became a declaration of protection. The document seemed to describe an object placed into another party's care. It sounded less like ownership and more like responsibility. That difference changed everything. A sale would mean Arden Museum had a legal claim to the relic connected to the charter. A guardianship agreement would mean the museum had only been trusted with it. And if that trust came with conditions, the museum could lose much more than an artifact. It could lose the story it had told the world for generations. The Saravan Cultural Council had spent years arguing exactly that. Their historians believed the relic had never been sold. Their legal advisors believed the museum's claim rested on a mistranslation. Their community had watched as an object tied to their own history, ceremonies, and ancestors became a centerpiece in a foreign institution. The council was not coming to Arden Museum for a polite visit. They were coming to demand answers. Mercer knew that better than anyone. He also knew that if Nadia's interpretation was correct, the charter could become evidence against him. He tried to dismiss her without appearing cruel. He said that ancient texts were filled with ambiguity. He suggested that memories of a parent's research could become distorted over time. He described Nadia's observations as interesting, but incomplete, the kind of thing that should be left to trained professionals. To anyone who did not know him, it might have sounded reasonable, but Nadia heard the message beneath it. You do not belong in this room. You do not understand what you are touching. You should be grateful that we are even listening. For a moment, she felt the old instinct disappear. She had felt it in school when teachers saw the name of the youth shelter on her records. She had felt it at social service offices when adults spoke over her as though she were a problem waiting to be processed. She had felt it at job interviews when people looked at her carefully repaired shoes and decided not to ask another question. Her mother had once told her that poor people were often expected to be grateful just for being allowed inside a room. But Elena had also told her something else. When someone becomes uncomfortable because of a question, that question is usually worth asking. Nadia opened her backpack. Inside was an old leather notebook. The cover had cracked at the corners. Several pages were held together by faded thread. The notebook had traveled with Nadia through every difficult year after her mother died. It had survived moves, shelters, temporary rooms, donated furniture, and nights when Nadia slept with it beneath her pillow because she was afraid someone might take it. To anyone else, it was only a worn book. To Nadia, it was the closest thing she had to hearing her mother's voice again. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with copied symbols, restoration sketches, arrows, questions, and notes written in Elena Reyes's neat, steady handwriting. Some of the pages showed the Serevan Charter from different angles. Others contained close studies of the border marks. One page held a rough drawing of a narrow triangular fragment, its edges covered with small symbols. Near the bottom, Elena had written 3 words. "Third fragment missing." Mercer saw the page, and this time his reaction was impossible to miss. His face did not collapse. He did not confess. He did not make the kind of mistake people made in dramatic stories when fear became too large to hide. Instead, he went still. For a man like Mercer, stillness was more revealing than panic. Owen saw it first. Evelyn saw it next. The junior scholars looked from the notebook to Mercer, unsure why a few handwritten words had changed the entire mood of the room. Nadia explained that her mother had always believed the charter was incomplete. The main tablet contained the beginning and central terms of the agreement, but not the final condition. Without that ending, the document could be interpreted in ways that benefited the people holding it. But Elena had believed a third fragment existed, and she had believed it contained the part that mattered most. Mercer dismissed the notebook as private material with no official authority. He said that scattered notes and old sketches could not be treated as evidence. Then he turned toward Owen and instructed him to escort Nadia out of the museum. The command was quiet, direct, and final. It was the kind of order Mercer had given many times before. Most people obeyed him because they knew what happened when they did not. Careers could stall, invitations could disappear, research funding could dry up. A single bad impression from the head of a department could follow a person for years. But Owen did not move. He had spent most of his working life following instructions. Security work taught people to respect procedure. You checked badges, you followed the chain of command, you kept order. You did not insert yourself into conversations that belonged to people with more education, more money, or more authority. But as Owen looked at Nadia holding her mother's notebook, he understood that this was not about procedure. It was about whether someone with less power deserved to be heard. "I think we should verify her claim first," he said. The sentence was simple, but it changed the room. Mercer turned toward him with open irritation. A security guard was not supposed to interrupt an academic dispute. He was supposed to stand near the door and remain invisible. Owen did not look away. Evelyn made the decision before Mercer could respond. She said Nadia would stay. No one would remove her from the building. No documents connected to Elena Reyes would be taken out of the museum. And no final presentation would be given to the Serevan Council until the old research records had been reviewed. Mercer tried to protest. Evelyn stopped him. She took the notebook from Nadia and studied the sketch of the triangular fragment. The shape appeared to fit along the lower edge of the Serevan Charter. Elena's handwriting was old, but the detail was precise. This was not the careless scribbling of someone guessing at a mystery. It was the work of a person who had spent long hours looking at something everyone else had ignored. Then another folded page slipped from the notebook. It fell onto the marble floor. Owen bent down and picked it up. The paper had yellowed with age. Most of it had been torn away, leaving only the bottom section intact. But that was enough. At the lower edge was a red administrative note. Further review suspended pending departmental authorization. Below it was a signature. Dr. Julian Mercer. Owen handed the page to Evelyn. She read it once, then again. Mercer said the report had been preliminary. He said Elena had raised questions that could not be proven at the time. He said the department had been under pressure. The evidence had been incomplete, and the suspension had been a normal professional decision. But his explanation did not answer the real question. Why had the review been suspended instead of completed? Why had the final pages gone missing? Why had the museum continued to present the charter as proof of ownership after one of its own researchers raised doubts? And why had Mercer reacted with fear when Nadia mentioned the third fragment? Evelyn looked at the old note in her hand. Then she asked Owen to take Nadia to the archive room beneath the museum. The archive was not part of the public Arden Museum. Visitors saw marble floors, bright galleries, climate-controlled display cases, and carefully chosen labels. The archive was where the less polished history lived. It sat below the galleries behind gray doors and narrow corridors. Metal shelves held old photographs, personnel files, maintenance records, restoration logs, rejected reports, and documents that had not been touched in years. It smelled of dust, paper, cardboard, and cold metal. For Nadia, it felt strangely familiar. Her mother had once worked in rooms like that. Not under gallery lights, not beside wealthy donors. In spaces where people handled broken objects, sorted fragments, and tried to restore what time had damaged. Owen switched on the lights. Rows of shelves stretched ahead of them. At first, Nadia found only small traces of Elena. Her name appeared in old staff rosters, payroll forms, inventory lists, and repair schedules. She was described as a technician, an assistant, a support employee. Never a researcher. Never a contributor. Never someone who had asked questions important enough to threaten the museum's official story. The absence hurt more than Nadia expected. It was one thing to know that her mother had been dismissed. It was another to see how completely her work had been erased. Owen searched through boxes marked with old project names. Nadia moved slowly between cabinets, checking dates and labels. The Saravan Charter had been studied in several phases over the years. The museum had recorded every restoration material, every temperature change, every crack, every photograph. Yet somehow, the final fragment had vanished from the story. Then Nadia found a photograph. It had been taken during an excavation exhibit opening 12 years earlier. Dr. Mercer stood near the center, younger but instantly recognizable, smiling beside donors, visiting scholars, and senior museum officials. Near the edge of the picture, almost cut off by the frame, stood Elena Reyes. She was holding a padded tray. On the tray were several clay fragments. One of them was narrow and triangular. Nadia placed the photograph beside the sketch from her mother's notebook. The shapes matched. The third fragment had existed. It had been found with the charter, and at some point, it had been removed from the official record. Owen searched another shelf and found a large storage box labeled Saravan Restoration Project, 2014 to 2016. Inside were folders of condition reports, photographs, correspondence, and maintenance forms. Several gaps appeared where files should have been. Empty spaces between folders suggested that someone had removed documents long ago. But at the bottom of the box, beneath a stack of old storage logs, Owen found an envelope. Elena Reyes's handwriting covered the front. Nadia stared at it for several seconds before touching it. The envelope had survived 12 years in the museum's basement. It had survived staff changes, renovations, storage moves, and whatever effort had been made to erase Elena's work. Somehow, It had remained hidden among files no one thought important enough to destroy. Inside was a partial report. The first page carried Elena's name. The second page described the same border marks Nadia had identified in the lobby. The third page argued that the charter might be a custodial agreement rather than a transfer of ownership. The fourth page mentioned a detached fragment that could contain the final condition of the covenant. And at the bottom, in the same red ink, was the same instruction. Further review suspended. Nadia read the pages again and again. The words were not dramatic. Elena had not written with anger. She had written carefully, professionally, and with the restraint of someone who knew that evidence mattered more than emotion. But between the lines, Nadia could see her mother's loneliness. Elena had been right. She had known something was wrong. She had tried to tell people with the authority to investigate. And someone had made sure the investigation stopped. Nadia thought about the last years of her mother's life. After losing her job at Arden Museum, Elena had taken whatever work she could find. She restored damaged books for a small shop across town. She cleaned offices at night. She repaired old furniture. She translated simple letters and labels for community groups. She never returned to academic conferences. She never received another museum position. She became quieter, more tired, and more careful about what she said. But she never stopped studying. Some nights, Nadia would wake up and see light beneath the kitchen door. Her mother would be sitting at the table with a cup of cold tea, copying symbols into the leather notebook. She had never spoken much about Mercer. She had never explained exactly why she had been forced out. But once, when Nadia was still young, she had asked why her mother kept working on something that had already caused so much pain. Elena had looked up from the page and said, "The truth does not stop being true, just because powerful people are tired of hearing it." Nadia had been too young to understand. Standing in the archive room with the report in her hands, she understood at last. Evelyn arrived a few minutes later. She had been trying to keep the museum from falling apart upstairs. The Saravan Council's cars had already been seen outside. Board members were gathering in the reception hall. The legal team had asked for an update. Donors were beginning to notice that the scheduled presentation had been delayed. But when Evelyn read Elena's report, the urgent noise of the building seemed to fade. She read it once as an administrator looking for liability. Then she read it again as a person trying to understand how an institution had allowed one woman's work to disappear. The report was not reckless. It was not speculative in the careless sense Mercer had claimed. Elena had documented her observations. She had included comparative references. She had outlined what needed to be tested. She had not demanded that the museum surrender the relic immediately. She had simply asked for the truth to be examined. Evelyn looked at Nadia. For the first time that day, Nadia was no longer an unwanted visitor, a shelter girl, or an inconvenience at the worst possible moment. She was the only person in the building carrying evidence everyone else had ignored. A message came through Evelyn's phone. The Saravan Cultural Council had arrived, and somewhere inside Arden Museum, hidden beneath a false label or a forgotten display case, was the missing fragment that could expose everything Julian Mercer had spent 12 years trying to bury. The Saravan Cultural Council entered Arden Museum without anger, spectacle, or raised voices. They did not need any of those things. Their presence alone unsettled the building. The delegation included historians, preservation specialists, legal advisors, and Professor Layla Rahman, one of the most respected scholars of ancient Saravan language and law. They had traveled for years through archives, private collections, old shipping documents, and the scattered records of expeditions that had removed objects from their homeland. For generations, People from Saravan had watched museums around the world display pieces of their culture. Sacred objects had been taken from temples, burial sites, family archives, and ceremonial grounds. They had been transported across oceans, assigned new catalog numbers, placed beneath foreign lighting, and described in languages their creators would never have recognized. The world often called that preservation, but preservation without consent could become another form of theft. The Saravan Council had come to Arden Museum because the charter mattered. It was not only a tablet, it was the legal memory of an agreement made during a time of violence and uncertainty. The relic connected to it had been treated as a trophy by the museum, but to the Saravan people, it was something else entirely. It represented continuity. It represented survival. It represented a promise made by their ancestors that no institution had the right to rewrite. Dr. Mercer greeted the delegation in the reception hall with the calm professionalism that had made him famous. His voice was smooth. His posture was controlled. He intended to lead them into the presentation room, show them the museum's official interpretation, and reassure the board that everything remained under control. But Evelyn interrupted before the briefing could begin. She informed the council that new archival material had been discovered and that the museum could not ethically present a final translation until the evidence had been reviewed. Mercer's frustration appeared only briefly. To most people, he still looked composed. But Layla Rahman noticed. She had spent decades working with scholars, collectors, politicians, and museum leaders. She knew the difference between uncertainty and concealment. She knew when a person was trying to protect truth and when a person was trying to protect a reputation. Then she saw the old leather notebook in Nadia's hands. Layla stopped walking. Her eyes moved to the cracked cover, then to the faint handwriting visible on the open page. For a moment, her expression changed from professional caution to something more personal. "Elena Reyes," she said quietly. I knew her name. Nadia looked up. The room seemed to narrow around those words. Years earlier, before Elena had been forced out of Arden Museum, she had contacted Professor Layla Rahman. Elena had asked questions about the structure of old Saravan custodial agreements. She had sent a short letter describing the border marks on the charter. Layla had replied with several sources and asked for more photographs. Then the correspondence stopped. Layla had never known why. She had assumed Elena had been discouraged. She had assumed the museum had chosen a different direction. She had assumed, as people often assumed when someone disappeared quietly from an institution, that the person must have made a mistake. Now, seeing Nadia, the notebook, and the partial report, Layla understood what had really happened. Elena had been silenced. Nadia showed her the report from the archive, the old photograph, and the sketch of the triangular fragment. Layla examined them carefully. She did not rush to make a grand claim. She asked questions. She compared dates. She looked at the handwriting. She studied the directional markings drawn by Elena beside the tablet. Then she said that the evidence deserved to be taken seriously. That was enough. For the first time, Mercer was no longer controlling the conversation. Nadia remembered another detail from the notebook. The sketch of the missing fragment had been drawn beside a rough outline of the museum's upper gallery. Her mother had written a short sentence beneath it, one Nadia had never fully understood. The final promise was moved where no one would think to read it. Nadia thought of the photograph she had found in the archive. Behind Elena and Mercer, almost hidden by the group of donors, had been a familiar display case. It stood in the upper gallery beside a bronze ceremonial mask. Nadia remembered seeing it years ago when her mother had once brought her to the museum before everything changed. The clue had been there all along. The group moved toward the upper gallery. Mercer tried to stop them without seeming like he was stopping them. He argued that the museum should follow established procedure. He said the council should not be drawn into an internal archival disagreement. He suggested that the search for a missing fragment could take days, perhaps weeks, and that it would be irresponsible to make conclusions before the proper team had examined every record. But his argument only made Evelyn more certain. A man who believed the fragment did not matter would not be trying so hard to delay the search. The upper gallery was quieter than the rest of the museum. Most visitors had been redirected because of the unexpected meeting. Rain darkened the tall windows, turning the city outside into a blurred gray landscape. The bronze ceremonial mask sat behind glass at the center of the room, its surface reflecting faint gold light. Beside it was a small display case containing several fragments that had been labeled as decorative objects of uncertain origin. One of them was triangular. It was smaller than Nadia expected, smaller than the fear it had caused, smaller than the years of silence built around it. It rested on dark velvet beneath a short museum label that made it sound meaningless. Decorative clay fragment, origin uncertain. Nadia stood before the glass and felt something cold move through her chest. For 12 years, the truth had been sitting in plain sight. Visitors had walked past it. Scholars had walked past it. Donors had walked past it. Mercer had walked past it every day, knowing exactly what it was. The conservator carefully opened the case. The fragment was removed and placed beside a high-resolution image of the Saravan Charter. The shape aligned with the lower border. The clay composition looked similar. The small directional marks along one edge matched the signs Nadia had identified on the main tablet. Professor Layla leaned closer. Then she looked at Nadia. "It fits," she said. The words carried through the gallery. Mercer immediately tried to dismiss the discovery. He said that fragments could be misleading. He said that similar clay did not establish legal meaning. He said that objects from the same region could resemble each other without belonging together. But Evelyn had already requested the old catalog records. A staff member arrived with digital copies from the museum database. The history of the triangular fragment appeared on the screen. Years earlier, it had been listed as part of the Saravan Restoration Project. Then, 11 years before, its catalog number had been changed. Its link to the charter had been removed. Its classification had been rewritten. Instead of a missing section of a legal tablet, it had become a decorative fragment of uncertain origin. The authorization belonged to Dr. Julian Mercer. This time, no explanation could make the fact disappear. The fragment was taken to the research wing under the supervision of the conservator, Layla, Evelyn, and members of the Saravan Council. The charter was brought from its secure case and placed beneath specialized imaging equipment. Scholars gathered around the monitors. Lawyers stood near the doorway. Board members arrived quietly, their faces pale as they realized the museum's crisis was no longer private. Nadia stood at the edge of the room with her mother's notebook held against her chest. The same people who had ignored her in the lobby were now waiting for the evidence she had led them to reveal itself. At first, the scan showed only dark clay, scratches, and the cloudy residue of an old protective coating. The conservator adjusted the lighting frequency. The image sharpened slowly. A faint line appeared, then another. Then a sequence of symbols emerged beneath the surface, running along the narrow edge of the fragment. The room became completely still. The missing ending had been found. Professor Layla did not translate immediately. She examined the image with care. She compared the symbols to the border marks on the main charter. She followed the Guardian's path Nadia had identified. She corrected the orientation. She checked the grammar against old Saravan legal forms. It was not a miracle. It was evidence finally being allowed to speak. The charter did not describe the sacred relic as something purchased. It did not grant permanent ownership to anyone outside the Cerevan community. It described the relic as an entrusted object, placed in the care of guardians during a period of danger. Those guardians had a duty to preserve it. They had a duty to protect it. And when recognized representatives of the Saravan people came forward to request its return, the agreement required the guardians to give it back. Then Layla reached the final sentence. Her voice softened as she translated the last words. The guardian who conceals this covenant, alters its meaning, or refuses the rightful return, forfeits all claim to hold what was never theirs. The words settled over the room like a verdict. The Arden Museum had never owned the relic. It had only been trusted with it, and its right to hold it had ended the moment it chose secrecy over truth. No one spoke for several seconds. The members of the Saravan Council stood quietly before the monitor. Their faces carried emotions that did not need explanation. Some looked angry. Some looked exhausted. One older historian closed his eyes, as though he had spent years waiting for the chance to hear those words spoken aloud. For them, the translation was not only a legal victory, it was proof that their ancestors had not been forgotten. The agreement had survived. The language had survived. The truth had survived, even after generations of people tried to bury it beneath labels, glass cases, and institutional certainty. Nadia looked toward Mercer. She remembered how he had looked at her when she first entered the lobby. He had seen a wet jacket, worn shoes, a torn backpack, and a girl from a shelter. He had assumed that was enough information to decide whether she mattered. He had thought he could dismiss her with polished words. He had thought Elena's name had been erased. He had thought the fragment was hidden safely behind a false label. But now the entire room was looking at him. Evelyn stepped forward with Elena's report in her hands. Dr. Mercer, you are suspended pending an independent investigation. Mercer tried to argue that the museum could not make such a decision based on a single translation. He claimed that the council was interpreting incomplete evidence. He insisted that catalog changes could have administrative explanations. He tried to make the truth sound complicated again, because complication had protected him for years. But the evidence was no longer a single translation. It was 12 years of hidden reports. It was altered catalog records. It was a missing fragment reclassified under his authorization. It was Elena's research. It was Nadia's notebook. It was the fear on his face every time someone came too close to what he had done. No one came to defend him. The scholars who had once treated him as untouchable stood in silence. The board members avoided his eyes. The legal team began collecting documents. The Saravan Council watched with the calm dignity of people who had waited too long for the truth to be acknowledged. Mercer's career did not collapse because he lacked intelligence. It collapsed because he believed intelligence gave him the right to decide which truths mattered. He had silenced Elena because she had less power than he did. He had buried her work because it threatened his reputation. He had hidden the fragment because it threatened the museum's claim. And he had dismissed Nadia because he believed a girl from a shelter could never challenge a man with titles, money, and influence. But the truth had returned through the daughter of the woman he tried to erase. The investigation that followed was larger than anyone expected. Arden Museum announced a complete independent review of the Saravan collection. The sacred relic was removed from public display and placed under joint care, while arrangements were made for its return. The museum agreed to work with the Saravan Cultural Council to review every artifact connected to the original expedition. More documents were found in the weeks that followed. There were internal emails showing that Mercer had discouraged staff from revisiting Elena's work. There were catalog revisions with no proper explanation. There were notes from meetings where concerns about ownership had been minimized because donors had invested heavily in the Cerevan exhibit. Mercer had not acted alone in every decision, but he had been the person with the power to make silence look official. His suspension became permanent. His academic appointments were reviewed. His published work was questioned. The museum removed his name from several public materials while the investigation continued. The punishment was not dramatic in the way people expected from stories. There was no public shouting. No one dragged him through the lobby. No one needed to. The truth did something more lasting. It took away the authority he had used to control others. The museum issued a public correction. Elena Reyes's name was restored to the official history of the Cerevan Charter. Her report was digitized, preserved, and acknowledged as the first internal research to identify the document as a custodial covenant rather than a transfer of ownership. For years, her work had existed only in a worn notebook and a hidden envelope. Now it became part of the record. A research grant was created in Elena Reyes's name for young people from underrepresented communities who wanted to study history, languages, preservation, archaeology, and cultural heritage. The museum's board did not create the grant because it could erase the past. Nothing could do that. They created it because the future had to become different. Nadia did not become rich overnight. She did not suddenly appear on magazine covers or receive a perfect new life from strangers who had ignored her before. That would not have been honest. Her problems did not disappear because one day changed everything. But the day did change the direction of her life. She received a paid internship with the joint Cerevan-Arden Preservation Project. The position came with transportation support, educational guidance, and stable housing assistance through a youth transition program. For the first time in a long time, Nadia had a place to go that did not feel temporary. She also had a future that did not depend on someone else deciding she belonged. Professor Layla became one of her mentors. She did not treat Nadia as a miracle or a symbol. She treated her as a young person with knowledge, patience, and a deep connection to the work her mother had begun. She taught Nadia how to verify evidence, how to question assumptions, and how to let facts speak louder than anger. Nadia listened carefully, but she never forgot the lesson she had already learned from Elena. Sometimes the most important thing a person can do is refuse to let the truth become invisible. Months later, Nadia returned to the archive room beneath Arden Museum. The room still smelled of dust, paper, and old metal shelves, but it no longer felt like a place where forgotten stories were buried. A new workstation had been set up near the window. There were digitization tools, preservation folders, and neatly labeled boxes waiting to be cataloged. Nadia entered with her own identification badge. This time, she did not come through the side door hoping someone would let her stay. She belonged there. On her desk sat her mother's old leather notebook beside a new archival folder. The label read, Elena Reyes Collection. Nadia opened the notebook to the first page. There, in faded handwriting, was a sentence her mother had written years before. The truth is often hidden in the part everyone else ignores. For years, Nadia had thought those words were only about old symbols and forgotten documents. Now she understood that they were about people too. They were about the quiet worker no one bothered to credit. They were about the poor girl no one thought was worth listening to. They were about the community whose history had been carried away and renamed by strangers. They were about the small fragment everyone walked past, because they had already decided it could not matter. The world often judges people by clothes, titles, money, addresses, and appearances. But wisdom does not always arrive wearing the shape people expect. Sometimes it comes carrying a torn backpack. Sometimes it stands quietly in the rain. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is the one carrying the truth that changes everything.